The transport bay doors hissed open with mechanical finality, and Ted felt his stomach drop as much from the artificial gravity shift as from the sight before him. The Cosmic Colosseum stretched impossibly wide, a nightmare of jagged metal spires and pulsing energy fields that shifted like a living thing. Holographic advertisements in a dozen alien languages flickered around the perimeter, promising entertainment for billions of viewers across the galaxy. "Stay close," Ted muttered to Erin, his hand instinctively finding the small of her back as they were shoved forward by invisible force fields. His sharp green eyes scanned the arena floor, already calculating escape routes that probably didn't exist. Erin's hazel eyes darted across the alien architecture, her anthropologist's mind cataloging details even as her fingers found her pendant. "The design patterns suggest multiple species built this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the crowd. "It's meant to be adaptable to—" A thunderous clang cut her off as sections of the floor began rotating, revealing new hazards. Spinning blades emerged from hidden slots, and energy barriers crackled to life in seemingly random patterns. The crowd's cheers intensified, a cacophony of alien voices baying for blood. "Welcome, fresh meat!" The voice boomed from hidden speakers, translated into their neural implants with clinical precision. "Today's entertainment features two representatives of the pathetic species known as humans." Ted's jaw tightened, the faint scar above his left eyebrow twitching as he fought down anger. They'd been diplomatic envoys, heading to a peaceful first contact with the Hegemony worlds. Now they were trapped in some galactic blood sport, their ship probably atomized. Their mission? A whip-crack of energy split the air inches from Erin's head. Ted moved without thinking, his diplomat's calculated demeanor evaporating as he tackled her to the ground. The energy blast carved a smoking furrow in the metal where she'd been standing. "The arena hungers," the announcer continued gleefully. "Will our human specimens provide adequate sport, or will they perish before the first commercial break?" Ted helped Erin to her feet, his hands steady despite the chaos around them. "We're not playing their game," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that had gotten him through a dozen hostile negotiations. "We survive first, figure out the rest later." Erin nodded, brushing dust from her braided hair. Her dancer's grace hadn't abandoned her even in terror, and she moved with deliberate precision as she studied their surroundings. "The crowd's energy patterns suggest they expect violence immediately. If we don't give them what they want, then we disappoint them." Ted cut her off, a grim smile playing at his lips. "I've made a career of managing expectations." The arena floor shuddered again, and new obstacles emerged. Towering pillars topped with sensor arrays, their surfaces crawling with targeting systems. Ted's restless energy found an outlet as his fingers traced the air, mapping trajectories and blind spots with unconscious precision. "There," he said, pointing to a cluster of energy barriers forming a rough triangle. "Temporary cover, but it'll do." They ran together, Erin's movements fluid as water, Ted's sharp and economical. The crowd's jeers followed them, alien voices raised in disappointment at the humans' apparent cowardice. But Ted caught something else in the cacophony, a note of uncertainty. They'd expected immediate combat, gladiatorial bravado. Instead, they were watching two humans work together with quiet efficiency. As they reached the shelter of the barriers, Ted pressed his back against the energy field, feeling the heat of it through his jacket. His hands fidgeted with a loose thread on his sleeve, a nervous habit that helped him think. "They want a show," he murmured, more to himself than to Erin. "But what kind of show?" Erin asked, her fingers worrying the pendant at her throat. Every culture has different expectations for their entertainment. Some want individual heroism, others demand spectacle, still others want to see if we're worth keeping alive, Ted finished, his green eyes meeting hers. In that moment, something passed between them, not romantic, but a recognition of partnership. Two humans, alone in a galaxy that saw them as disposable entertainment. The arena floor bucked beneath their feet, and Ted realized the barriers were moving, slowly herding them toward the center where other obstacles waited. In the distance, he could make out other figures, aliens of various species, some cowering, others brandishing weapons, all trapped in the same deadly maze. "Question is," Ted said, his scar catching the light as he grinned with dark humor, "do we give them what they expect, or do we show them something new?" Erin's rare smile flickered across her face, warm and fierce. "I vote for something new." The crowd's roar built to a crescendo as the arena continued its deadly reconfiguration. But for the first time since their capture, Ted felt something other than despair. They were alive. They were together, and they were about to teach the galaxy something about humanity it had never seen before. The games had begun, but Ted and Erin were playing by their own rules. The arena's reconfiguration had forced them into proximity with other captives, and Ted found himself face to face with 7 feet of scaled, muscled reptilian fury. The creature's yellow eyes blazed as it studied the two humans, its tail lashing the metal floor with thunderous impacts that rang through the suddenly quieter section of the Colosseum. "Small, weak, soft," the alien rumbled, its voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked its species' communication. Jagged emerald scales caught the arena's harsh lighting as it flexed claws that could easily tear through human flesh. "You will not last the first trial." Ted stepped forward, not back, his diplomatic training overriding every survival instinct screaming at him to flee. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, though Erin could see the slight tension in his shoulders that meant he was ready to move fast. "You're probably right," he said conversationally, as if they were discussing weather instead of imminent death. "We're not exactly built for this kind of entertainment." The reptilian's head tilted, a gesture that Erin recognized from her studies of territorial species. Confusion, not aggression. It had expected fear, defiance, or desperate pleading. Instead, the human was agreeing? "But here's the thing," Ted continued, his green eyes never leaving the alien's face. "We're all in the same cage. Whether you're built like a tank and I'm built like a diplomat doesn't matter much when the arena wants us dead." A low growl rumbled from the creature's throat, but its tail had stopped lashing. Erin watched the exchange with growing fascination, her anthropologist's mind cataloging the subtle shifts in both participants. The alien's aggressive posture was genuine, but there was something else, a careful attention to Ted's words that suggested intelligence beyond mere predatory instinct. "Your words are wind," the reptilian said, but the words lacked conviction. Its slitted eyes flicked to the arena walls where new obstacles were emerging. "The strong survive, the weak feed the sand." "True enough," Ted said, his scar twitching as he suppressed what might have been a smile. "But you know what's stronger than either of us individually?" He gestured to encompass not just himself and Erin, but the dozen other captives scattered across their section of the arena. "All of us working together." The alien's growl deepened, but Erin caught the subtle shift in its stance, weight shifting from the balls of its feet to a more balanced position. Less predatory, more thoughtful. She leaned slightly forward, her keen eyes studying the patterns etched into the creature's scales. "The ritual scarification," she murmured, just loud enough for both Ted and the alien to hear. "Those aren't battle wounds, they're ceremonial markings. You're not just a warrior, are you? You're a guardian. Those marks indicate responsibility for others." The reptilian's eyes snapped to her, and for a moment she saw something raw and wounded flash across its alien features. "My clutch siblings are dead," it said, the words heavy with grief that transcended species barriers. "I failed them. I will not fail again by trusting soft-skinned strangers." Ted's restless fingers stilled completely, a sure sign he was processing emotional data as much as tactical. When he spoke again, his voice carried the tone Erin had heard him use in their most delicate negotiations. Absolute sincerity wrapped in steel. "Then don't trust us. Use us." The arena floor shuddered again, and grinding mechanical sounds announced the approach of new hazards, but the reptilian's attention remained fixed on Ted. "Explain." "You want to survive this," Ted said, his words clipped and precise. "So do we. You're stronger and faster, but you're thinking like an individual combatant. We're thinking like a team. You use our coordination, we use your strength. When one of us wins, we all win." The alien was quiet for a long moment, its gaze shifting between the approaching dangers and the small group of humans. When it spoke, its voice carried a note of grudging curiosity. "What would you have me do, small diplomatic one?" Ted's grin was quick and sharp. Help us change the rules." Before the reptilian could respond, the arena floor buckled violently, sending all of them scrambling for purchase. New barriers had emerged in a complex pattern, and the energy fields were herding them toward what looked like a gauntlet of spinning blades and projectile launchers. "Move together," Ted called out, not just to their reptilian almost ally, but to the other captives within hearing. "Watch each other's backs, share information. The arena wants us to fight each other. Let's disappoint it." Erin felt her heart race as she realized what Ted was attempting. Not just survival, but active rebellion against the Colosseum's expectations. She clutched her pendant tighter and called out to the reptilian in its own harmonic tongue, a phrase she'd memorized from her cultural studies. The alien's eyes widened in surprise. "You speak the old words," it said, wonder creeping into its voice, "the words of the clutch bond." "I speak many words," Erin replied, switching back to the common tongue, "and they all say the same thing: we're stronger together." The reptilian straightened to its full, intimidating height, but when it spoke, its voice carried new resolve. "I am Krex of the southern reaches, guardian of the scattered clutch. I will consider this alliance." "Ted," the human diplomat said, extending his hand in the universal gesture of greeting, "and considering is enough to start." As Krex reached out one massive claw to carefully shake Ted's much smaller hand, the crowd's noise changed tenor. The jeers and bloodthirsty cheers became confused murmurs. This wasn't the violence they'd paid to see. But Ted was just getting started. The gauntlet of blades and energy projectiles stretched before them like a mechanized nightmare, each spinning saw and plasma cannon programmed to extract maximum entertainment from their inevitable deaths. The crowd's confusion had given way to eager anticipation. Surely, the alliance between species would crumble under the first real pressure. Ted crouched behind the makeshift cover of an overturned arena barrier, his restless fingers drumming against the metal as he studied the pattern of death ahead. Beside him, Erin's hazel eyes tracked the timing of each trap, her analytical mind parsing the rhythm of destruction. 23 seconds between the third and fourth blade cycles, she murmured, her pendant clicking against her collarbone as her breathing quickened. "But the plasma cannons are randomized." "No, wait." She paused, head tilting in concentration. "They're reactive, motion sensors." Krex loomed over them both, his massive frame casting a shadow that provided both physical and psychological shelter. The reptilian's yellow eyes followed the conversation with sharp intelligence. "You plan while the arena reshapes itself," he growled, though his tone held approval rather than criticism. "Wise, but we cannot wait forever." As if summoned by his words, the barriers behind them began to retract with grinding finality. They had perhaps 30 seconds before they'd be forced into the gauntlet, ready or not. "Here's what we do," Ted said, his diplomatic calm holding despite the circumstances. He pointed to a series of support columns that ran along the left side of the gauntlet. "Krex, those columns will hold your weight, but not for long. You move from pillar to pillar, draw the motion sensors. Erin, you track the pattern shifts and call out safe windows." "And you?" Krex asked, though his muscled form was already coiling for the desperate sprint. Ted's grin was razor-sharp. "I improvise." The last barrier retracted with a thunderous clang, and they moved. Krex launched himself at the first column with terrifying grace, his claws finding purchase on the smooth metal as plasma bolts seared the air around him. The crowd roared approval at the spectacle, alien voices raised in bloodthirsty delight. But Ted was already in motion, not following Krex's path, but angling toward a cluster of spinning blades where the timing created a narrow window of opportunity. His lean frame slipped between two rotating saws with inches to spare, his weathered face set in concentration. "Ted," Erin's voice cut through the arena's cacophony. "Platform sequence changing, 20 degrees left now." He pivoted without hesitation, trusting her analysis completely. The platform where he'd been standing erupted in sparks as energy projectiles converged on his former position. His shoulder clipped a blade housing as he rolled behind cover, tearing his jacket and sending a line of blood down his arm, but he was alive. Krex had made it to the third column, but the structure was beginning to buckle under his weight and the arena's assault. Plasma burns decorated his scales, and his tail lashed in pain and fury. "Guardian of Softskins," he called to Ted, "your path is blocked." Ted looked ahead and felt his stomach drop. The blade sequence had shifted, creating an impenetrable wall of spinning death between him and the exit. But beyond the blades, he could see other captives, a group of smaller aliens cowering behind inadequate shelter, trapped by their own terror. Time slowed as Ted made his choice, not the path to safety, but the path to others who needed help. "Change of plans," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority that had navigated 100 diplomatic crises. He sprinted not toward the exit, but deeper into the gauntlet, toward the trapped aliens. "Ted, no!" Erin's cry held genuine anguish, but she was already moving, her graceful form flowing between obstacles as she tracked his desperate route. Her analytical mind had mapped the safest path to follow him, even if it meant abandoning her own escape. Krex snarled in what might have been alien profanity, but instead of continuing to the exit, he launched himself backward into the gauntlet. His massive frame absorbed plasma hits that would have killed the humans instantly, his roar of pain and defiance echoing through the arena. Ted reached the trapped aliens, 4 small insectoid creatures huddled in terror, just as Erin arrived beside him. Her face was pale but determined, her pendant clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. "This was not the plan," she said breathlessly. "Plans change," Ted replied, his hands already checking the nearest alien for injuries. The creature chittered in fear, but didn't pull away from his touch. "You 4, what are your names? Can you move?" The aliens stared at him in incomprehension. They'd expected death and instead found a predator species trying to protect them. One of them, slightly larger than the others, spoke in halting common tongue. "We are disposable. Entertainment dies. Why do you?" "Because that's what we do," Ted said simply, his green eyes meeting the alien's multifaceted gaze. "We help." The crowd had gone strangely quiet. This wasn't the individual heroics or brutal competition they'd expected. Across the galaxy, billions of viewers watched as a human diplomat organized a rescue in the middle of a death trap. Krex reached them, his scales blackened by plasma burns, but his resolve unshaken. "The exit window closes soon," he rumbled. "We move together or we die together." Erin's analytical mind was already working. "Single file, Krex leads to absorb the heaviest fire. Ted, you coordinate the smaller aliens. I'll call the timing." "And if we don't make it?" one of the insectoids asked, its voice barely a whisper. Ted's scarred face split in a grin that was equal parts determination and lunacy. "Then we show them how humans die." But as they began their desperate run toward freedom, something unexpected happened. The arena's assault slackened, not stopped, but moderated, as if the system itself was confused by their behavior. In the viewing boxes high above, an overseer's bioluminescent form pulsed with uncertain colors. This was not how the game was supposed to work. The humans were changing the rules. The medical bay beneath the arena was a stark contrast to the flashy violence above: sterile white walls, automated healing devices, and the quiet hum of life support systems tending to the wounded. Ted sat on an examination table while a medical drone sealed the gash on his shoulder, his green eyes distant with thought. The blade had cut deeper than he'd initially realized, but he barely seemed to notice the treatment. Erin paced nearby, her graceful movements tight with barely contained energy. The rescue had succeeded. All 4 of the insectoid aliens were alive, as were several other captives their improvised alliance had helped, but survival felt hollow when they remained trapped in the Colosseum's belly. 15 species represented in today's game, she murmured, her anthropologist's mind automatically cataloging what she'd observed. But the selection pattern is wrong. These aren't random abductions or criminals. They're representatives. Krex rumbled from where he crouched near the entrance, his massive form serving as an early warning system. His plasma burns had been treated, but the reptilian still favored his left side. Each species showing unusual development, unusual potential. Ted's head snapped up, his diplomatic instincts suddenly alert. "What do you mean, potential?" Before Krex could answer, a new voice cut through the medical bay's quiet hum. Erin's feet went still, and Ted felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The voice was speaking in the common tongue, but with the clinical precision of the arena's translation system. Reduction protocols remain on schedule. Species 847 human shows unexpected cooperative behaviors, but this merely confirms the necessity of early intervention. The games will proceed as planned. The voice was coming from a maintenance access panel near the ceiling, probably part of the arena's communication network. Ted caught Erin's eye and pointed upward, his finger pressed to his lips. She nodded and moved closer, her hearing more acute than his. "The Hegemony Council grows impatient," a second voice replied, this one carrying the harmonic undertones of an entirely different species. "3 cycles since the last suppression. They want results." "Results they shall have," the first voice continued with chilling satisfaction. The human delegation was particularly fortuitous. Their diplomatic mission to the outer worlds would have established formal contact with 17 developing species. Now, there was a pause that somehow conveyed enormous satisfaction. Now they will serve as an example of their species' ultimate inadequacy. Ted's hands went completely still, his fidgeting forgotten. The scar above his eyebrow seemed to stand out starkly white against his suddenly pale face. They hadn't been randomly abducted. They'd been targeted. Their peace mission— "The Colosseum serves its purpose," the second voice continued. "Promising species are identified, tested, and eliminated before they can challenge the established order. The humans showed concerning signs of rapid technological and social development. Their tendency toward cooperation across genetic and cultural lines was problematic." Erin's hazel eyes had gone wide with understanding and horror. She pressed herself closer to the wall, her pendant forgotten, as she strained to hear every word. "Species 723 Krexian also demonstrates dangerous unifying tendencies," the first voice noted. "The Guardian clutch social structure could serve as a model for planetary cooperation. Similarly concerning." Krex's yellow eyes blazed with sudden fury, and his claws scraped audibly against the metal floor. Ted shot him a sharp look. They needed to hear this. "The insectoid colonies have been showing signs of inter-hive coordination," the second voice added. "Another concerning development. All will be terminated in tomorrow's final event. The galaxy will witness their failures and understand the futility of challenging the natural order." The communication cut off, leaving the medical bay in silence that felt thick as a physical weight. Ted slid off the examination table, his movements controlled but carrying a dangerous energy that hadn't been there before. When he spoke, his voice held the quiet authority that had made him one of humanity's youngest and most successful diplomatic envoys. "How many species have they done this to?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "How many promising civilizations have been fed into their arena and labeled as failures?" "Dozens," came a new voice from the shadows near the back of the medical bay. An ancient alien emerged, its translucent skin revealing the slow pulse of silver veins beneath. The creature moved with painful slowness, but its milky eyes held depths of experience that spoke of centuries. "My people were among the first, 60 cycles ago. We showed signs of developing interstellar meditation techniques that could have revolutionized peaceful communication between species." "They're not running a gladiator arena," Erin said, her analytical mind making the connections with terrifying clarity. "They're running a systematic extermination program. Any species that shows signs of being able to challenge their dominance gets fed into the Colosseum and labeled as entertainment failures." Ted's scarred face had gone hard as granite. His restless energy found focus, and when he looked at his companions, there was something in his green eyes that made even Krex straighten unconsciously. "Then we don't just survive their games," he said with quiet finality. "We beat them at their own system." "Impossible," the ancient alien whispered. "The overseers control everything. The arena, the broadcast, the narrative. Even if we won every event, they would simply declare us unsuitable and execute us privately." Ted's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. "That's assuming we play by their rules." He looked at each of them in turn, Krex with his guardian's honor, Erin with her brilliant analytical mind, the ancient alien with its hard-won wisdom. "But what if we change the game entirely?" Krex's tail began to lash again, but this time with anticipation rather than fury. "You have a plan, small diplomatic one." I have the beginning of one, Ted admitted, but we're going to need help from everyone down here. His gaze swept the medical bay, taking in dozens of alien species, all scheduled for death in the name of entertainment. How do you feel about starting a revolution? In the depths of the Colosseum, surrounded by the galaxy's discarded hope, Ted began to plan not just their escape, but the dismantling of a system designed to crush any species that dared to dream of something better. The overseers had made one critical error in their calculations. They'd never encountered humans before. The holding chambers beneath the arena had been designed for isolation, meant to keep different species separated and suspicious of each other. But Ted had turned the space into something resembling a diplomatic convention, albeit one where everyone was scheduled to die tomorrow. Representatives from 15 different species sat in a rough circle, their various forms creating a tableau that would have been impossible anywhere else in the galaxy. Ted stood at the center, his diplomatic training serving him well as he navigated the complex web of alien psychologies and cultural taboos. His restless energy had found perfect outlet in the delicate work of building trust between natural enemies, but the strain showed in the tight line of his shoulders and the way his scar seemed more prominent in the harsh lighting. The Zephyrian hive mind operates on consensus, Erim was explaining to a towering crystalline alien whose form rang like wind chimes when it moved. But your species uses harmonic decision-making. The frequencies aren't compatible, but the underlying principle is the same: collective intelligence toward common goals. The crystalline being's tones shifted to what Ted had learned indicated cautious interest. The soft flesh speaks wisdom, but harmony requires tuning. How does the hive mind adjust for discordant elements? One of the rescued insectoid aliens, the larger one who'd spoken before, chittered nervously before answering. Individual voices are absorbed into the greater song. But perhaps, it paused, mandibles clicking in what might have been thought, perhaps harmony can exist without absorption. Ted felt a small surge of satisfaction. 3 hours of careful negotiation, and they were finally making progress. But the challenge wasn't just getting different species to work together, it was doing so under the constant threat of death while the overseers watched their every move. Krex shifted his massive bulk, drawing attention with the deliberate movement of a natural leader. The Guardian clutch protects all within its boundaries, he rumbled, his yellow eyes reflecting the chamber's dim lights. But these boundaries must expand if the protection is to be meaningful. Protection requires strength, growled a new voice from the shadows, another reptilian but smaller than Krex, with darker scales and scars that spoke of many battles. The overseers have weapons beyond counting, ships beyond number. What strength do the trapped possess? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ted could see doubt creeping into the various alien expressions, and he knew this was the crucial moment. Lose them now, and any hope of organized resistance would crumble. Individually? None, Ted admitted, his honesty cutting through the developing pessimism. The overseers are right about that, but they've made one critical error in their calculations. He gestured to encompass the entire group, his voice carrying the conviction that had brokered peace between star systems. They've put representatives from the 15 most promising species in known space all in one place. They've given us common cause, common enemy, and most importantly, they've given us each other. Erin stepped forward, her analytical mind adding crucial details. The broadcast system reaches billions of viewers across thousands of worlds. Every species that's ever lost someone to the Colosseum is watching. If we can show them what's really happening here— The overseers control the narrative, the ancient alien interrupted, its translucent form shimmering with agitation. They will edit, they will spin, they will— Will they? Ted's smile was sharp. Because I've been watching the crowd reactions and something's changing. Today's events weren't what they expected. The viewers are questioning. Some of them are uncomfortable with what they're seeing. A soft humming filled the chamber as various aliens considered this. The crystalline being's tones shifted to something that might have been hope. The frequency of doubt spreads faster than the frequency of certainty. But doubt alone is not enough, Krex observed pragmatically. We need action. We need— A thunderous clang echoed through the chambers as blast doors sealed the exits. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red, and the overseer's voice filled the air with its clinical precision. Unusual congregation detected, correction protocols activated. Gas began hissing from hidden vents, and Ted felt his throat start to burn. Not lethal, they were too valuable as entertainment, but designed to break up gatherings and enforce isolation. Around the circle, aliens began to succumb to the sedative effects. "Scatter," Ted called out, even as his own vision began to blur. "Remember what we talked about? Trust each other." But as consciousness faded, he caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Through the chamber's observation window, an overseer's bioluminescent form pulsed with what could only be satisfaction. They'd been watching the entire time, letting the alliance form just to demonstrate how easily it could be broken. When Ted woke hours later, he was back in an isolation cell, alone except for Erim, who was stirring on a bench across from him. The diplomatic progress of hours had been undone in minutes, the fragile bonds scattered like leaves in a storm. "Did it work?" Erin asked groggily, her hand instinctively finding her pendant. Ted sat up slowly, his head pounding from the gas. For a moment, doubt threatened to overwhelm him. The overseers were right. They controlled everything, the arena, the narrative, the very air the captives breathed. What hope did any of them really have? Then he looked at Erin, her hazel eyes still bright with determination despite their setback, and felt his resolve solidify. "Phase 1 worked," he said quietly. "They know we're a threat now. They wouldn't have intervened if they weren't worried." "Phase 1?" she asked, though her smile suggested she already understood. "Getting their attention," Ted replied, his grin sharp as a blade. "Phase 2 is going to be much more interesting." Through the cell's narrow window, he could see other captives being returned to their isolated chambers. But something had changed in their movements, their postures. The alliance might have been scattered, but the idea of it remained. The overseers had won the battle, but Ted was already planning the war. The arena had been reconfigured overnight into something resembling a maze crossed with a death trap, its walls crackling with energy barriers that shifted position every few minutes. Ted crouched behind a temporary barrier, his diplomat's mind racing as he tried to coordinate with allies he could barely see through the electronic haze. "Krex, status!" he called out, his voice carrying the authority that had kept their fragile alliance together through the morning's trials. "Guardian position holding," came the reptilian's rumbling reply from somewhere to the left. "But the energy fields are herding us toward the center arena. Classic elimination pattern." Erin's voice reached them from another direction, her analytical tone cutting through the arena's din. "The maze configuration follows a mathematical pattern, but it's not random. Someone's been feeding the system tactical information about our group dynamics." Ted felt ice form in his stomach. What kind of information? Movement patterns, trust relationships, tactical preferences. Erin's voice trailed off as the implications became clear. "Someone's been watching us very carefully. Someone on our side." The blast of plasma energy that seared past Ted's head came from behind, from a position that should have been held by one of their allies. He rolled aside, his lean frame moving with desperate efficiency as more shots peppered the area where he'd been crouched. "Contact rear!" he shouted, but even as the words left his mouth, he saw the shooter. One of the insectoid aliens, not the larger one who'd been part of their core group, but a smaller one with twitching mandibles and red, multifaceted eyes that darted nervously in all directions. The creature held a weapon that could only have come from the arena's own security systems, its sleek design clearly not meant for captive use. As Ted watched in stunned betrayal, the insectoid fired again, this time at the crystal being whose harmonic tones had been crucial to their interspecies communication. The crystalline alien's death song was like breaking glass mixed with wind chimes, beautiful and terrible. Other captives scattered, the careful coordination Ted had built dissolving into chaos as trust shattered along with the alien's form. "Why?" Ted called out, not to the traitor but to the universe itself. His diplomatic instincts demanded understanding even in the face of treachery. The insectoid's mandibles clicked rapidly, its nervous energy making it nearly impossible to understand. Survival, they promised. Hive cluster would be spared if one proved loyalty. Not all could live, so some must choose. Krex's roar of fury echoed through the maze as the reptilian charged toward the traitor's position. But the damage was already done. The crystalline being was dead, 2 other aliens were wounded, and the coordination that had kept them alive was crumbling. Ted made a choice that went against every diplomatic instinct he'd ever developed. Instead of trying to salvage the situation, instead of attempting negotiation or de-escalation, he sprinted directly toward the insectoid traitor. His scarred face was set in grim determination, his restless energy finally finding violent outlet. The insectoid's red eyes went wide with surprise. It had expected anger, perhaps even retaliation, but not this direct personal confrontation from the diplomatic human who'd been preaching cooperation and unity. Ted hit the alien hard, his lean frame impacting with surprising force. They went down together, the stolen weapon skittering across the arena floor. Up close, Ted could see the terror in the creature's multifaceted eyes, the way its mandibles trembled with fear and guilt. "They have my hive cluster," the insectoid chittered desperately. "Eggs, larvae, the next generation. They will kill them all unless I prove humanity is weak, prove the alliance's failure." For a moment, Ted's anger wavered. He understood desperation, understood impossible choices. But then he thought of the crystalline being's death song, of Krex's trust, of Erim's brilliant analysis being turned into a weapon against them all. "So you sold us out to save your own," he said quietly, his voice carrying bitter disappointment rather than rage. "Would you not do the same?" the insectoid shot back, its fear making it bold. "Would your Erim not matter more than strange aliens? Would your species not come first?" The question hit Ted like a physical blow. Because honestly, if it had been Earth at stake, if it had been human children threatened, would he have made a different choice? But that was exactly the point. "Maybe," he admitted, his scarred face honest in its pain. "But that's what they're counting on, isn't it? That we'll always choose our own over the greater good. That we'll never really trust each other enough to be strong." Erim's voice reached them, urgent with discovery. "Ted, the arena's configuration is not just hurting us, it's recording everything, our responses, our—" "So you sold us out to save your own," he said quietly, his voice carrying bitter disappointment rather than rage. "Would you not do the same?" the insectoid shot back, its fear making it bold. "Would your Erim not matter more than strange aliens? Would your species not come first?" The question hit Ted like a physical blow, because honestly, if it had been Earth at stake, if it had been human children threatened, would he have made a different choice? But that was exactly the point. "Maybe," he admitted, his scarred face honest in its pain. "But that's what they're counting on, isn't it? That we'll always choose our own over the greater good, that we'll never really trust each other enough to be strong." Erim's voice reached them, urgent with discovery. "Ted, the arena's configuration, it's not just hurting us. It's recording everything. Our responses, our strategies, our failures, every single data point is being fed back into the system." Her voice was tight with a new kind of horror. "They're not just testing us, they're learning from us, optimizing their extermination protocols." Ted pushed himself off the insectoid, who scrambled away, chittering incoherently. The revelation was a colder shock than any plasma blast. This wasn't just a brutal game, it was a sophisticated, self-improving system designed to ensure the Hegemony's eternal dominance. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting against a galaxy-spanning algorithm of oppression. Krex, having dispatched the remaining arena security drones with brutal efficiency, arrived at their position, his scales still smoking from plasma burns. "The small one speaks truth," he rumbled, his yellow eyes scanning the shifting energy barriers. "The patterns are too precise, they anticipate our every move." "Then we give them data they can't process," Ted said, his voice low and dangerous. He looked at Erim, a silent question passing between them. Her hazel eyes, usually so analytical, now burned with a fierce, almost reckless determination. "The broadcast," Erim whispered, her fingers instinctively finding her pendant. "It's the only way. If we can disrupt their narrative, if we can show the galaxy what's truly happening here, unedited, unspun, Impossible. The ancient alien's voice crackled over their comms, a faint ethereal presence that had somehow maintained a link. The broadcast is heavily encrypted, layered with sub-frequency filters. Only Overseer-approved content reaches the wider networks. But what if the content isn't approved? Ted countered, a wild, desperate idea forming in his mind. What if the broadcast itself becomes the weapon? He looked at Krex. Krex, how much force can you generate? Pure, unadulterated kinetic energy? The reptilian's tail lashed, a sound like thunder. Enough to shatter lesser metals, enough to crack a moon, given time. Good, Ted said, a grim smile touching his lips. Erim, you said the arena learns from us. What if we give it a lesson it can't compute? A paradox? Erim's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. A self-destructive loop. If we force the system to broadcast something so antithetical to its purpose, it might overload, or at least create a glitch that exposes the truth. The Overseers are arrogant, Ted continued, his voice gaining momentum. They believe their system is infallible. They believe they've accounted for every variable. They haven't accounted for sheer, unadulterated human stubbornness. He looked at the medical bay, where the other surviving captives were huddled, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning hope. We need to get everyone to the central broadcast nexus. It's heavily guarded, but it's our only shot. The journey through the reconfigured maze was a desperate scramble. The arena, sensing their coordinated movement, intensified its assault. Plasma cannons fired relentlessly, blades spun faster, and new energy barriers materialized to cut off their escape. But this time, they weren't just surviving. They were moving with a purpose, a shared, desperate hope. Krex became their living shield, his massive form absorbing hits that would have vaporized any other species. He roared defiance with every impact, his fury a tangible force that seemed to push back against the arena's relentless assault. The insectoid who had betrayed them, now cowering and abandoned by the Overseers, found itself unexpectedly protected by Ted, who, despite his earlier anger, refused to leave anyone behind. Erim, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of calculations, her voice guiding them through the shifting maze with uncanny precision. Left, now! The floor panel ahead is unstable, or plasma burst in 3 seconds, 5 degrees right. Her pendant, once a comfort, was now a tool, its smooth surface reflecting the shifting energy fields as she analyzed their patterns. They reached the central nexus, a towering spire of alien technology humming with raw power, its surface covered in blinking lights and holographic displays broadcasting the games to the galaxy. Security drones, larger and more heavily armed than any they'd encountered, swarmed around it. "This is it," Ted said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Krex, you create the diversion. Erim, you find the access point. Everyone else protect Erim and draw fire. I'll talk?" Krex didn't hesitate. With a guttural roar, he launched himself at the nearest cluster of drones, his claws tearing through their metallic husks. The Overseers, focused on containing the massive reptilian, momentarily ignored the smaller humans. Erim, moving with a dancer's grace, darted through the chaos, her eyes scanning the nexus for any weakness, any exposed port. "There!" she shouted, pointing to a small, almost invisible panel near the base of the spire. "A diagnostic port. It's shielded, but not against a full-power discharge," Ted finished, his eyes gleaming. He turned to the other captives, their faces grim but determined. "This is it. We show them what humanity is. We show them what all of us are capable of when we stand together." The ancient alien, its translucent skin glowing faintly, raised a trembling hand. "We are with you, small diplomat, for all who have fallen." As the other captives engaged the remaining drones, creating a desperate multi-species melee, Ted positioned himself directly in front of the diagnostic port. Erim, her fingers flying over a small handheld device she'd salvaged from a fallen drone, worked frantically to bypass the shield. "Almost there," she grunted, sweat beading on her forehead, "but it's going to take a massive energy surge to force the broadcast through." "Krex!" Ted bellowed. "Now!" The reptilian, battered but unbowed, unleashed a deafening roar. Every ounce of his considerable strength, every ounce of his fury, channeled into a single devastating blow against the Nexus spire. The metal shrieked, energy conduits sparked, and the entire structure vibrated violently. At that precise moment, Erim's device beeped. "Now, Ted, now!" Ted slammed his hand onto the now exposed diagnostic port. He wasn't sure what he was doing, only that he had to channel every ounce of his being, every moment of fear, every spark of hope, into this single, desperate act. He thought of Earth, of humanity's quiet resilience, of Erim's unwavering belief. He thought of Krex's loyalty, of the ancient alien's wisdom, of the chittering insectoid's desperate choice. He thought of all the species the overseers had crushed, all the potential they had extinguished. And then he screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain or fear, but a primal guttural roar of defiance, a sound that transcended language, a pure, unadulterated expression of humanity's refusal to break. It was the sound of a species that, when faced with overwhelming odds, chose not to fight alone, but to unite. Across the galaxy, billions of viewers watched in stunned silence as the arena's carefully curated broadcast flickered. The overseer's clinical voice, narrating the failures of the human species, was abruptly cut off. In its place, for a fleeting, terrifying moment, appeared Ted's face, contorted in that raw, defiant scream. Then the feed went black. Chaos erupted in the viewing boxes. Overseers, their bioluminescent forms pulsing erratically, shrieked orders. Technicians scrambled, but the damage was done. The system, unable to process the paradox of a species choosing unity over self-preservation, had suffered a catastrophic cascade failure. The arena itself began to destabilize. Energy barriers flickered and died, sections of the floor buckled, and the deafening roar of the crowd was replaced by the groaning of tortured machinery. "It worked!" Erim cried, collapsing against Ted, her body trembling with exhaustion and exhilaration. "We broke it!" Krex, his scales scorched but his eyes bright with triumph, let out a booming laugh that echoed through the collapsing arena. "The small diplomat has a mighty voice." But their victory was short-lived. A new alarm blared, louder and more urgent than any before. "Containment breach. All non-essential personnel evacuate." Through a newly opened breach in the arena wall, they saw them. Hegemony warships, their sleek predatory forms descending from orbit, weapon systems glowing ominously. The overseers weren't just going to let them escape, they were going to make an example. "They're coming for us," the ancient alien whispered, its voice filled with a weary resignation. "They will not allow this truth to spread." Ted looked at the approaching fleet, then at Erim, then at Krex and the other survivors. Their faces were bruised, battered, but alight with a newfound resolve. They had exposed the truth, but they were still trapped. "Then we give them one last show," Ted said, his voice calm amidst the chaos, "a final lesson in what happens when you underestimate humanity." He turned to the insectoid who had betrayed them. "You said they promised to spare your hive cluster if you proved humanity was weak. What if you proved them wrong? What if you showed them the strength of a true alliance?" The insectoid's red eyes darted between Ted and the approaching warships. Its mandibles clicked, a rapid, frantic sound. "But my clutch." "They lied to you," Ted said, his voice gentle but firm. "They always lie. They would have come for your hive cluster eventually. This is your only chance to save them, to save everyone." A flicker of understanding, then fierce determination, hardened the insectoid's gaze. It chittered a rapid command to its remaining brethren, and they began to move, their small forms surprisingly agile as they scrambled towards the collapsing arena's control panels. "What are they doing?" Erim asked, her brow furrowed. "They're going to overload the arena's primary power core," Ted explained, a dangerous glint in his eye. "It'll create a massive energy pulse. Not enough to destroy the ships, but enough to disrupt their shields, scramble their targeting, and create a window for us to escape." "And for the broadcast to get out," Erim finished, her understanding complete. The sudden, uncontrolled energy surge from the arena's core would bypass the overseer's filters, blasting Ted's defiant scream and the truth of their resistance across the galaxy. The insectoids worked with frantic speed, their tiny limbs a blur as they rewired circuits and bypassed safety protocols. The arena groaned, its metal structure beginning to tear apart under the strain. The Hegemony ships opened fire, their plasma lances searing through the arena walls. Krex roared, charging to intercept, buying them precious seconds. Erim, meanwhile, was already pulling up schematics on her salvage device, looking for the nearest escape pod, any way out. "Got it," she shouted, pointing to a small unmarked access tunnel. "Maintenance tunnel. It leads to the outer ring." "Go," Ted urged, pushing her forward. "Get everyone out." "Not without you," Erim retorted, grabbing his arm. "I'll be right behind you," Ted insisted, his eyes fixed on the insectoids. He had to ensure they completed their task. He had to ensure this message got out. A final, desperate surge of energy coursed through the arena. The ground bucked violently, and a blinding flash of light erupted from the central nexus. The Hegemony ships recoiled, their shields flaring, their weapons sputtering. "Now!" Ted roared, pushing the last insectoid towards the tunnel. He turned to follow, but a piece of falling debris, a twisted spire of arena metal, crashed down, blocking the tunnel entrance. He was cut off. Through the narrow gap, he saw Erim's horrified face, Krex's furious roar. "Ted!" Erim screamed. "Go," Ted shouted back, his voice raw. Tell them what we did." He turned, his back to the collapsing tunnel, and faced the enraged overseers who were now pouring into the arena, their forms pulsing with incandescent fury. They had won the battle, but they had lost the war. As the arena crumbled around him, Ted stood tall, his scarred face alight with a fierce, defiant pride. He was just one human, but he had ignited a spark. Across the galaxy, the truth was spreading, carried on the very airwaves the overseers had sought to control. The Hegemony, for all its power, had underestimated humanity's most dangerous weapon, hope. And Ted, the diplomat who chose to protect, had just delivered the most powerful message of all. The Cosmic Colosseum, built to crush dreams, had instead become the crucible of a revolution. His sacrifice, a final unedited broadcast, would echo through the stars, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of cages, humanity would always choose to help. And that, in the end, was a game the overseers could never win.